many doors I couldn't think to dream. Just imagine what I can do when you believe. Alone in my room, I cried, Lord, why you love me.
Hey, everybody. This is Voices of Wisdom, incredible conversations that feed the mind, move the heart, and lift the soul. I'm your host, Sabrina Nichole, and I'm so glad you've joined us. March is Women's History Month, and we're elevating the voices of amazing women who are using their gifts to spread love, healing, and hope in the world. Simply put, these are women doing God's work. And speaking of God's work, we're sending a special thanks to our sponsor, The Kindled Life, a company on a mission to spread hope and breast cancer awareness. Check out their website in the video description and place an order in support of breast cancer warriors. Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Voices of Wisdom, hosted by Sabrina Nichole. I am your host, Sabrina Nichole, if you couldn't tell. And this month, the month of March, is Women's History Month. And you could tell from all of the episodes, from the description, from my website, from my blog, that during this month of March, I'm really focused on elevating the stories and the voices of women who are doing God's work. And we define God's work in all kinds of ways. Certainly, we understand God's work being, representative or symbolized in organized religion, institutional religion, works of spirituality, those things that automatically kind of come to mind, but also expanding our understanding of God's work as so much more than that. And I am once again thrilled to be joined by an incredible woman, someone who I have had the pleasure and the honor of knowing for over a decade, probably 15 years now, Tayuanee Dewberry. And Tayuanee is this just fantastic gumbo of awesome. She is a nonprofit executive leader. She is a professional natural bodybuilder. Tayuanee is a musician. She practically came out of her mother's womb, singing and playing drums and playing the piano and all those wonderful things. Tayuanee is also an incredible leader and coach of others. She's also a licensed therapist. So as you can tell, her resume is extensive. She's just a great human being and a fantastic person to know. Tayuanee, welcome. And I look forward to this conversation. Is there anything else you'd like to say about who you are?
We don't have to say that was great. I like the word gumbo.
Absolutely. It's all in there together. And so, kind of diving into that subject matter, how do you define God's work?
Wow. I define God's work as how we go about our daily lives. Mm. Now, that wouldn't have been my definition growing up. I had of course, grew up in church and had a very interesting view of what God's work was. It was narrowly defined as things that you do associated with your religion, associated with your church activities. And then when you left there, it was something else. So my evolution and understanding of God's work has expanded quite a bit to, I think God's work is what we do on a daily basis. It's how we live our lives. It's the people we touch on each day and for each thing that we do. So it's a gumbo of things, and it's a way of really creating an experience for those that we are around. And I think that's what life is about.
Yeah, beautiful. And so if we were to take this gumbo of God's work and kind of package it into something tangible or practical, what would you say is specifically God's work that you do?
I think God's work that I do is to be an example, a leader and a coach for those who are around me.
Mhm.
I think in every aspect of my life, you mentioned working at the nonprofit organization where I am, or even if it is at my church, or if it's when I'm sitting across from someone in a therapy session. It is how my life and my actions impact and influence the people who are standing in front of me, those who may be hurting, those who may be questioning, those who may just need a little bit of encouragement. I think that is the essence of God's work, is how we relate to each other on a day-to-day basis and move each other toward healing and wholeness in our everyday lives.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. The way I've been describing God's work and the impact of God's work is really aligned with what you just said to me. And with the Sabrina Nichole platform, what we put out there is God's work is anything that leads to love, hope, and healing. And I think when we frame it that way, it takes on a different flavor. It takes on a different understanding and hopefully empowers people to know that all of us, no matter what the title, no matter whether or not we're in a church or out of a church or in a mosque or in a synagogue, all of us play a part in doing God's work in some way. And so with that being said, how did you come to understand or know or even operate in the ways that you do in doing God's work? What is your call narrative?
My call narrative. Wow, that's a great question. I think my call narrative, growing up, I of course had this great influence of an evangelical experience, apostolic experience, and then and people would say, "Oh my goodness, you have such a call on your life." And immediately, in our church, we say, "Well, that is, you should be preaching." And people would push and they'd say, "Well, you should be preaching. You have such a great message." And I've always loved teaching, so I would teach Sunday school. And at a young age, I started doing those types of things. And people say, "Well, don't wait too long. Go ahead. You got a call on your life." And it never felt right. It never felt like, and even going through some of the things I went through in my life, I would say, "Oh my gosh, there's got to be more than this. It's got to be bigger than this." I remember feeling like I would go to church, and I feel like for purposes of my own development, I would watch people come in, and I always felt people. I think that was part of my call, is I could feel people when they came around, and people would be so sad and burdened and hurting, and we would pray for them, and they'd go back away, and they would come back again, but I could feel their pain, and I'd be like, "God, there's got to be more than this.
Yeah.
There's got to be something else." I believe in prayer, but don't we have something else to offer? And I'm like, "God, don't you care?" It seemed very passive, and it seemed very disconnected and impersonal to pray. And so as I was searching myself, I came to the realization that you're right. I have a call on my life, but my pulpit is not in a sanctuary. It's not in a church. And that's been a tug of war for those around me, for those who I grew up with, and they've been like, "Well, God has called you." And I'm like, "He certainly has." And I understood that what God was calling me to was church, but not the building.
Yes.
He was calling me to the people, to those who were hurting, to those who were coming into places of employment every day, and they were hurting, and they needed encouragement. They needed someone who could pray with them there, someone who could encourage them there. And then, whether I'm even at the gym, I feel like my pulpit is so broad. And I remember, my call experience when I feel like I heard it the loudest. I was in a really low place in my life, and I'd gone to a friend's house, and I was sitting, and I had dozed off, and I woke up, and there was a preacher on the TV. He said, "There are people whose ministry is so broad that these pews cannot contain it.
Wow.
And you might not understand it, but they won't be in these pews every week. They won't stand in this pulpit and speak. They won't be at the door, but they will be doing God's work. And that hit me in a different place. Now that felt right.
I love that. And, listening to you share, and you hit on this. One of my follow-up questions was going to be, so how did you respectfully, lovingly, not allow the opinions or the thoughts or the quote unquote encouragement of other people push you into a place or a posture that didn't feel right for you? They meant well, I'm sure, but having that internal knowing of that's cute. That's my phrase. I'm like, oh, that's cute, but that ain't quite it, and you touched on that. But then also it kind of reminds me a little bit of my own story, where even today there are people who will ask me, so are you pastoring a church yet? And I'm like, no, that's not who I've been called to. That's not where I've been called. And so, what you're saying reminds me of this concept of marketplace ministry. There are those who do congregational ministry. God bless you. I do think that there's a place for that. But like you said, there are so many others who are called outside of the walls of the church, whether that be the physical walls or even the figurative walls of the church. So that story is powerful, Tayuanee. And along the way, can you talk a little bit about, a couple of experiences maybe that shaped your worldview, that shaped your understanding of your calling? You've mentioned that really on time, on target message from that preacher that you saw on TV that day. But are there any other stories, any other experiences that helped to shape your understanding of your call?
Oh, so there are several experiences that help to shape that. And I will tell you that you mentioned it. When people mean well, they will often push you, and it's hard when you are from a certain culture, and there are ideas about that, and you want to be you want to be accepted, and that creates a dissonance, because it might even be easier to just say, okay, well, I'll do this thing. The hard thing was to go against the grain.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of anxiety and understanding that this just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right, and to go against the grain was a big deal, and it provoked a lot of anxiety. But I'm glad that what I know now to be the courage to do something different, because of the lives that I've encountered and had the opportunity to really just cross paths with. And what I realized is, even in my particular professional experiences, my occupational experiences, for instance, there was a young woman who sat with me, and she said to me, she said, there's something different about you. And I'm, was a little puzzled. And she said, I was to my last hope. And you believed in me. She shared that she had these challenges. And, I am a proponent of, who knows what people are going through.
Yeah.
And, ironically, where I love the church experience, believe me, I love the church experience. But typically when we are being challenged, when we are being hit with some of the hardest obstacles, we're not at church.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do we deal with that on a day-to-day basis? And she said, it is encouraging to me that you said you believed. I believe to my core that is the work of Jesus Christ. How many times did we hear that when he spoke to people's lives? He wasn't in the temple. He was at the well. He was, in the alley. He spoke to people where they are. And so for me, it is when I came to the understanding that when I am in the workplace, when I am in the gym and somebody walks up and they start that conversation, that is the point at which ministry is engaged.
Yeah.
And that was life-changing for me, because the Bible does say go out. I think the epitome of ministry that I've been called to is to go out. And we don't have to make it complicated. I don't have to stand on the street with a bullhorn or anything like that. It should be in my everyday walk, whether it's at the Dollar General or the Food Lion, whatever that is. But understanding that when we have the greatest opportunity to really impact the lives of those who are hurting, who just need to know that they're loved, that they're worthy, it is in our normal everyday path.
Yeah.
And this young lady said, nobody gave me a chance because I have some mental health challenges. And she said, it speaks to me, and it just said so much that you thought I could do this. And one of my biggest sayings is, we are more, so much more than the worst thing we've done.
Yeah.
And we're so much more than our little issue here or little issue there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're not going to throw people away. We're going to help people understand that you're enough and that we all have challenges, and we're going to walk this walk together.
Absolutely. And as you were talking, Tayuanee, thank you for sharing that. I am reminded that God's work isn't just about what we do. It's about who we are. And truly and authentically, the work we do hopefully flows from who we are. And that really is what makes it a powerful and impacting show of God's work in the world. We are told that we are the salt of the earth. We are the light, right? And this aspect of, and I think a lot of us, again, well-intentioned, but I think we got it wrong, where it's like the focus or the emphasis is on the doing, and not enough understanding of the being, to be the church, to be God's love working in the world, all those things. And moment of transparency here, just to validate and affirm what you're saying, even about how you go about doing God's work in your personhood. I will never forget, I wrote about it in the book. I will never forget when I was experiencing my mental health crisis, and I was very much feeling broken and ashamed and feeling guilty and feeling like, this is it for me. I will never forget, you sat across from me, you looked at me, and you said, this does not define you. It's those moments like that, where it's like, that's God's work. That is God's work. That work of, again, love, hope, healing, and even restoration, right? You're so good at that. And I think it's part of why you're such a phenomenal leader and such a phenomenal coach. You have this gift to speak to those wounded and broken places in people, and that is just incredible. It's incredible.
That's funny. I laugh about that because one of my friends actually was, one of the same friends that I was with when I heard the message I was mentioning earlier. But apparently I said something to her. We laughed about it. She said, but it changed her perspective. Mm-hmm. And it was just me being me. Mm-hmm. She said, do you remember what you said to me? And I said, I have no clue what you're talking about. And she said, you looked at me and said, you're going to be okay. You know that. Mm-hmm. And I said, you're just having a momentary nervous breakdown, but you're going to be okay. Just know that. And I laughed because I was like, what was I thinking? But she said it was something in how emphatic you were, like, you're fine. Yeah. This is a moment. And I want people to know that. And I speak to that because I feel like God prepares us for our call by putting us in those situations. Mm-hmm. It's hard and maybe this was my challenge with church, it's hard to speak to where someone is when you can't feel their pain.
Yeah.
Not to get too far in this, but it talks about in the Bible where Jesus felt, his humanity. We have to allow our humanity to allow us to feel. And so for me, I remember my first situation where I was encountering, and I was young and didn't understand it, was anxiety and depression. I was in college and I was at my wit's end. I remember being in my room and had contemplated, I can't do this anymore. I had resolved I was going to end my life. And that particular night, and I was at peace with it. I was like, I can't do this. And there was something I was just like, it's got to be over. There's got to be more to this, and I can't do this anymore. So I went to sleep that night after I'd resolved it. That was the answer.
Yeah.
And I'm a very rational, analytical person. This needs to make sense, period. You got people who know me. I don't know that any of this meshes well, but I need things to make sense. And it needs to be rational. But I went to sleep and I remember waking up. And believe me, I woke up and there was a figure in the corner of my room. And I had never felt that kind of peace and love in my life. And it was that moment, even in my greatest pain, that I felt that kind of love and presence. But it's the thing where it was like, this is a moment, but you're going to be all right.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's powerful. And thank you for sharing that, because I, personally, thus says Sabrina, I don't know that we share enough about our vulnerable and downtrodden moments, right? For various reasons, whether it's we're ashamed that we were in that space, or fear that we will be judged, or maybe even some concern that people will respond with empty platitudes. And that's something that I was going to say, somebody who doesn't know you, who maybe heard the story you shared earlier, it's like, oh, you just said this is just a temporary moment, it's just your nervous break. But the reason it wasn't an empty platitude is because you felt that person's pain. And the gift of empathy and the gift of presence, where you can say that kind of stuff and it's not offensive because people know you're with them, you're present with them. It's not that empty, oh girl, you be all right, just go on about your business. It wasn't that at all. And I do agree with you. I think part of it is because you've walked a walk. Your journey has been one where you know what it's like to feel hurt and pain. You know what it's like to feel isolated and lonely. You know what it's like to sort of be at the end of your rope and you're just barely hanging on. And I think that adding that element of humanity, like you said, to the work that you do, and again, because it flows from who you are, is what makes it so powerful in people's lives.
You just said something.
Okay, go ahead.
That triggered me there. Absolutely. And I think that was the thing that made me struggle with what I was experiencing at church. I would see people come in, they would obviously be hurting, and then we pray and we send them on their way. I had a problem with that because it didn't make sense to me. And it's like, but wait a minute, but wait, what's going to happen when they walk away? And so you said it, not empty platitudes, because I'm going to tell you that you're going to be okay because I've been there and I feel you, but I'm not walking away.
Yeah.
I believe that the ministry is to sit in the ashes together.
Yes.
Not that we're saying these things, because again, the ministry is not in the words, it's in the you're going to be okay. And I'm in this with you because I believe what is anything that we do, if not in relation to others.
Yes. Yes. Love it. Powerful. Amen. All of the above. And in that, really the source or the essence of healing. We don't always heal in isolation. And this may not go over well with some people, but in my theology is we heal, we live, we grow in community. and a part of community is being present with one another, which is why I tell people, whether I'm counseling, doing bona fide ministry or coaching, I tell people, find your tribe. You got to find your group that's going to hold you down, who's going to sit in the ashes with you. And I'll add this, and won't let you sit in the ashes too long. Those folks that are going to love you and love you up out of what you are currently in. So that's beautiful. Thank you for that, Tayuanee. And I'm curious if you can speak to, just from your experience or your vantage point, what are some of the challenges that women face when doing God's work in a way that's similar to how you do God's work?
One of the biggest challenges that I faced is because of my idea of ministry, it changes how I perform my professional duties. And so sometimes there is a lot of speculation. There is a lot of even sometimes condemnation of, why are you relating to people in that way? There are these standards of how leadership in business should look, how if you are sitting in a CEO's seat, this is how you relate to those subordinate employees. And believe it or not, I get a lot of kind of pushback for being that person who will sit down and have lunch in the break room with the custodian.
Yeah.
And literally, like, what are you doing? They shouldn't feel like they should be that close to the CEO. But I am God's minister first.
Yeah.
Thank you for the title you gave me, but that one is it's an auxiliary title. It's an auxiliary responsibility. It is an auxiliary function in my life. My first and foremost thing is to be in the space with people who really need to know God's love in a non-traditional fashion. And so for me, I feel like the occupation gives me the opportunity for ministry.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of pushback on what that looks like, because I don't take a traditional approach to how I interact with the people that I encounter.
Yeah.
But I believe God has blessed my occupational efforts, has blessed those organizations that I've sat with, because I allowed that work to be the first fruit of what I do. You also get pushed back because there are certain ways that females are expected to behave. You shouldn't have this level of emotion, because when you feel people deeply, sometimes that emotion shows itself.
Yeah.
People will categorize it as the woman with the emotions. But I think that God gave us a unique gift in our emotions as women. And where someone said to me recently, well, I know you've been really feeling these things. And I shared with someone that I think, this might be a fragile situation. I said, please don't mistake my passion for fragility.
Yeah.
And don't mistake this passion and this willingness to show my humanity as weakness.
Yeah.
And they were kind of boggled with that and kind of looked at me, and I said, there's no weakness here. Being willing to show up authentically in what God gave us, that as women, is strength, because it goes against the status quo, but we have it for a reason.
I love that. And how true it is that I do believe that women carry these very unique ways of expressing our gifting in the world. I do believe that there is feminine and masculine energy. I do believe, and that's not to discount any of the conversations, any of the things around gender and fluidity and all of that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about truly and authentically tapping into who you are, how you show up, and the unique ways that our gifts and our love is expressed through that, or they are expressed through that. And it is hard, right? It's hard to take your genuine, authentic self into these various places and be your genuine and authentic self. Because, like you said earlier, sometimes it goes against the grain. Sometimes people don't understand. Sometimes when people haven't done the work that you've done to be able to sit and stand in your truth of who you are, they'll be like, you're doing this wrong. No, that internal knowing of this is who God made me, this is how God made me, and this is how God has assigned to my hands to show up and to do this work. If you reflect back, on your, and I don't even want to keep it in the occupational realm. I want to take a different route and say, when you show up at your bodybuilding competitions, when you show up at the gym, when you show up, in your full athletic human womanness self, when you think back on those experiences, what is one thing or two things that helped to shape and refine your commitment to show up just as you are, to do God's work in that atmosphere, in that arena, the ways that you do?
I will share with you in that regard, because I just mentioned that kind of feminine energy and this idea of emotions, which people tend to give that a softer feel. They perceive that as being kind of the softer side. It's probably confusing when I show up and I'm chiseled, and bodybuilding requires you to be a little chiseled and muscular. And I love that. And I actually started doing that because I was, really just trying to deal with stress. And I started working out and all of that, not even thinking about this as, another step in ministry. But lo and behold, what I find is I still have that experience of running into people, and ministry finds you, wherever you go. But one of the amazing things is, I always say, the minute we think we have our concept of God, we've missed it.
Yeah.
When I would cry out and say, God, there's got to be more than this, I understood for myself at that point that, oh my goodness, wow, God is big enough to encompass all, to understand all.
Yeah.
And it's beyond my own comprehension. But that was a stress reliever, because then I got to the point where I was like, you know what? I don't even have to worry about this, because if God wants it done a certain way, if God wants things to be a certain way, he'll handle that, and I don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
And so ministry opened up. But the bonus to that is, as I was walking in this and I was encountering people in this bodybuilding world, and I'm walking around chiseled, again, it kind of confuses people to have this softer side. But then you also show up and they're like, oh my goodness, what is going on with your arms? And oh my gosh, you have no body fat. But anyway, I think, and I'm like, God, why do you keep having me encounter these people?
Mm-hmm.
And, there are certain things. And again, it's people who have experienced things I've experienced, who are looking for compassion, who are looking for love, who are just looking for a hug sometimes.
Yeah.
But, I'm working through this for myself, and God will confirm some things for you, to remind you that he's there with you. Yeah. Right. And I remember I was growing up and I was a phenomenal athlete. And, the road was paved for me. I remember somebody asking me, where are you going to go to school? And I was like, I don't know. At this point, I'll turn around in a circle, and wherever I'm pointing, we'll go that direction. Mm-hmm. I was, playing basketball, and I was one of the top 25 recruits my junior year in the nation.
Wow.
And because of some choices I made, I didn't get to play my senior year. Mm. And so the things that I had planned, the dreams, the days I'd spent preparing, the 300 jump shots a day, the 300 free throws, all of those things, and all the prophecies of God saying, you will be a professional athlete. I thought I would go into that first class of the WNBA, but that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And I started my bodybuilding journey back in 2021 and started doing that then. And I was just going about my way. And last year, I had a moment where I just stopped and I was overcome with emotion. Can you imagine? And it was crazy. I'll describe it for you because you got, I was in this chiseled state again. I'm looking this way, but I was overcome with emotion while I'm on the Stairmaster. I was having a moment with God and I had a moment of recollection. And God reminded me because in May of that year, I won my professional bodybuilding. I don't want to get emotional.
It's okay.
I won my professional bodybuilding pro card.
Yeah.
I didn't think much of it at the time, but I was on the Stairmaster and God reminded me.
Yeah.
I told you, you would be a professional athlete. I'm almost 50 years old. And I think it was his way of reminding me that I haven't forgotten you.
Yeah.
And if I said it, that means it's got to come to pass.
Absolutely.
And it was confirmation for me that ministry happens in so many different places and in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And I felt God saying, even in this, I am here with you.
Yeah.
So that was, it was an interesting way to have the affirmation of God that you're doing the work.
Yeah.
You're doing the work I called you to, even if it doesn't look like what people expected.
Yeah. That just stirs so deeply in me, Tayuanee, because not just how people expect it, but even how you expect it at one point, right?
Yeah.
And we're talking about the work of God, the ministry of God. I would even go so far as to say that in that moment and in this way, God was ministering to you, to that younger you that maybe was like, I messed up my opportunity. I messed up. No way that this thing is going to happen. Whatever that little seed of doubt or whatever, that in you doing this thing that God has called you to in this way, no matter how strange it may look or seem to other people who just don't understand it, you were ministering to you just as much as you minister to other people.
Yeah.
And the other thing that comes up for me is, oh my goodness, how many people, when they got wind that you were taking this route of bodybuilding, I think you had your fair share of folks who were cheering you on. And I think you had your fair share of folks who were like, what are you doing? Have you lost it? Like,
absolutely. I had those folks who were like, are you okay? You sure? Because this is extreme and you do know how old you are, right? So all of those things.
Yeah. But in your yes, right? In your, I know y'all don't get it, but just hold on. I feel compelled. I feel led to move in this direction. And oh my goodness, you glossed over this, and I'm gonna say it just because I'm your friend and I'm your sister girl, and I know you better than a lot of other people do. I don't want to gloss over the fact that you got your pro card in May of that particular year. You got your pro card within your first year of bodybuilding.
I did.
There are people who've been doing this for years and years and years and still have not gotten their pro card. So I want to celebrate you in that. I don't want us to gloss over that, but truly, God saying, I didn't forget. I didn't forget what I told you. I didn't forget you. And that aspect or that element of when you're faithful, right, over a few things, God makes you quote unquote ruler over many. And that's beautiful. And I hear you also talk about some of the challenge of, for some people at least, walking into that kind of arena as a woman, but you're showing up cut, chiseled, we could slice stuff on your muscles. You so cut, and and still showing up in the fullness of your womanness, in the fullness of your femininity, in the fullness of your confidence in who you are, in such a way that you can command the stage. That to me is powerful. And I will also say, and then I'm gonna stop talking, how much of a ministry is that, or could that be, for other women, other girls, other young ladies, to see that display of strength without the sacrifice of your feminine energy?
I have, and it's interesting because someone asked me about, that journey, and I said, I want to convey to young women or even old women, because at this point, I'm a little long in the tooth to have started this journey. But it's okay to be strong. It's okay to be strong. On the other side of that, you don't have to be strong all the time.
Yeah.
But the two can coexist.
Yeah.
I had a young lady, and this was the moment at which I realized, oh my goodness, okay, God, there's ministry here. I was working out and I was, training, and there was a young lady, and I would see her, she'd always be smiling, and she, was doing what she was doing. And one day hey, how you doing? We're working out. And I looked at her, but there was something in her eyes. I took a chance on, I believe I'm hearing God correctly. And I looked at her and I said, you're not okay. And her smile kind of started to drop and tears rolled out of her eyes. Yeah. And she couldn't speak, and she just said, no. But then again, that moment to sit in that space, and say, you know what? It's okay. This is a moment. This doesn't define you, unless we can sit in this together.
Yeah.
And to me, that is the very essence of ministry, because we can be strong. And I know the Bible talks about, and people talk about, don't forsake gathering yourselves together. But a lot of times that's great. But what happens when we go back out into the world, into our everyday activities, and we need that moment of encouragement?
Yeah.
Who's going to be confident enough in the gym to say, I'm sorry, I just want to speak to you for a minute, but it's okay if you're not okay. Yeah. Let's sit together. If I'm in the break room and I come in, it's okay right now. Do you mind if I sit with you? I am humbled and grateful to carry that ministry. There are not a lot of eyes on it. There's not a congregation to see me speak or any of that. But I believe it is just as impactful and important to be okay with your ministry not being a global or mega church or even church ministry, but understanding that one-on-one ministry that nobody ever sees is just as important.
Yeah.
As
I love it. You already started heading down this path, but I'm going to take us there in a more direct, specific way. And that is, as you think about your journey, as you think about the work you do that flows from who you are, what advice would you have for other women who maybe are feeling compelled to do God's work similar to how you're doing it?
Oh my goodness. The one thing I would say is trust your gut and the instinct that God has given you. I think we are always pushed and encouraged to hear the voices of everyone else, but trust that small voice, that gut instinct that sometimes nobody else will understand. Because I I feel like I experienced a lot of anxiety because because of the internal turmoil between where I was like, something's not right, and what people were saying. And had I just stepped into some of those things, I'd have missed God completely. But trusting that, I feel like my steps are ordered. And I'm not here to say I get it all right, but I would say some of the biggest learning moments for me was when I didn't follow that gut, that instinct, that small voice that really was leading me. So in an environment where we are often challenged and often encouraged not to trust ourselves, trust yourself and your connection with God.
Yeah.
In knowing how your ministry needs to show up.
Yeah. Love it. Sort of in similar fashion, let's say, there are men watching who want to support, advocate for, and ally with women doing God's work similar to how you're doing it. What advice would you have for them?
I would say be open and supportive for men who are advocating and who are trying to support women in this work. I think it's important to challenge yourself, not to expect the ordinary, not to have a preconceived framework of what this should look like, but be open to the possibilities of how do I support a woman who is venturing into a non-traditional space, or even in a traditional space, because the truth of the matter is, even in traditional spaces, women haven't been accepted. Be supportive, but also be an advocate.
Yeah.
Be a sponsor. If you believe, that woman to be moving according to God, according to the Spirit, and according to her heart, be an advocate, a sponsor, a supporter. Don't just say, hey, I'd appreciate what you're doing. Be willing to get in the trenches with her.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think we talk enough about what it means to sponsor someone. Sometimes when we hear sponsor, we think money. But what do you mean when you say sponsor her?
I say be willing to be that voice, even in spaces where she is not. Be willing to say, to validate and to promote that ministry if you know it to be authentic.
Yeah.
To promote that person, to be that, again, that voice, that advocate, even when she's not in the room.
Yeah.
Sponsor, not necessarily with money, but with the currency that sometimes speaks louder and takes us further. Sponsor with who you are, especially if you've made it into spaces where she is not.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And I would say, to your point, sponsor, especially when she is not in the room, to be able to speak for herself, right? And sponsor in such a way that the next time around, she is invited and welcomed to enter into that space.
Yes.
That's what sponsoring is. We could talk for hours and hours and hours, but I am mindful of your time. And so, and just so, again, I'm so very grateful that you took time out of your busy schedule to talk with us, to share with us your voice of wisdom and how you do God's work. We're winding up down now to a portion of this conversation that I like to call paying homage. And so my two questions of that are, number one, can you share with us your favorite female character, woman character from, it could be the Bible, the Quran, it could be a Disney character, it could be from your favorite fairy tale, whatever it is. Tell us who your favorite woman is in some text, some narrative.
Well, this might not be a popular one, but if I were to be honest, my favorite female character in the Bible is Rahab.
Tell us why.
Because Rahab reminds me that no matter what she'd done in her past, she was still worthy of being used by God.
Mm.
What a reminder. So, I mean, all of the things, all of the stigma and all of the dirtiness associated with, wow, she was a harlot, in our day, a prostitute, hooker, whatever you want to call her. But when it came down to it, God saw her heart, not her past, and was willing to use her anyway. Wow, what a gift. And I relate to that deeply.
Yeah.
So
I love it.
That is my favorite character.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Second question of paying homage. Who is another woman doing God's work that you would want to shout out today?
There are a couple of folks doing God's work that I would like to shout out today, but I appreciate you, Sabrina, for how you are doing God's work and the boldness with which you actually take a non-traditional path. A lot of people don't have that type of courage and don't have that type of confidence and assurance in their ministry, but you do. So I will shout you out today for the work that you are doing. And another person that I would shout out is Joanne Stevenson Jenkins. She is an older lady, a minister in the Episcopal Church. And she quietly does the work of God. Every morning I get a text message from her with encouragement. And she probably doesn't know just how impactful her words are on a daily basis, and her emphasis on social justice. It encourages and moves me to continue doing the work that I am doing in the areas of social justice, equity, and to do it through the lens of ministry. So she's amazing.
Well, Miss Joanne Stevenson Jenkins, we're shouting you out today. Thank you for doing God's work. Tayuanee, thank you so much for this incredible conversation. I know that there are people who have watched or who are listening who are just as inspired by your wisdom as I am, and they want more of it. So how can folks get in touch with you?
You can contact me at via email at dewberry35@gmail.com. Again, dewberry35@gmail.com.
Fantastic. And for those of you who are like, I'm driving or I can't write it down, have no fear. We've got that contact information in the description. You'll be able to reach out to Tayuanee via that email address. And out of curiosity, Tayuanee, you weren't expecting this, but if someone is interested in getting involved in or even supporting your bodybuilding ministry and journey, where would you direct them? Is there a website they should go to?
Oh yeah. You could go to check out ocb.com. I was just informed recently that if you Google me, it pops up.
Love it. Love it. So likewise, we'll also put that link to OCB in the description. So fantastic. Tayuanee, again, thank you so much. And keep doing what you're doing, girl.
Thank
we need
you.
you. Yeah. Have a good one.
You too.